Welcome to the Restorative Longevity Podcast, where we share how to increase your quality of life while also increasing your longevity. Now let's welcome our host, Jimmy Yen, also known as the AcuSensei. Jimmy is a licensed acupuncturist, herbalist, nutritionist, and restorative longevity expert dedicated to guiding you on your journey to vibrant health and lasting wellness.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of our Restorative Longevity Podcast, where we talk about how to increase your life, the number of days that you live, but making sure that every single one of those days is a high quality life. So increasing better life, longer life, right? That's the purpose of the Restorative Longevity Podcast. It's not just about a longer life and the miserable days of the longer life, or it's not just about better quality, but shorter lifespan. I'm talking about why can't you bake your cake and eat it, right? That's the purpose of this Restorative Longevity Podcast. So thank you for watching and tuning in. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button. In alignment, what is the point of this podcast? What is this point of this podcast? Increase your brain power with carbs. The point of this podcast. Now, this is going to be different parts of this because this is a longer topic, and it's got a lot of important information and misinformation that you may not know. I'm going to debunk some myths. But what's the point of this podcast, of this part one? Part one is to get you to know you need carbohydrates. Your brain needs carbohydrates. Many people misinterpret that as just sugar, right? But it's a specific type of sugar. The word sugar encompasses many different chemical terms, right? And so what the fitness industry, food industry, medical industry, health industry, they all tend to clump sugar as into just carbs. And yes, you need carbs, but they also clump sugar like all sugars are the same, and they're not all the same. Your brain needs a specific type of sugar called glucose. Not other of the os, those words with the os that end with the os. Your brain needs glucose in order to become smarter, in order to function better, in order to have memory, right? And so we're going to, through this series of brain power with carbs, I'm going to dive in deeper to let you know what type of carbs, what am I talking about, right? But let's first understand the overall process. But thank you for joining. And again, hit the subscribe button if you have not hit it. So let's start with the basics, because you have to understand the basics to understand I already told you the answer. You need carbs. You need complex carbs. The answer is this: you need complex carbs for your brain. Your brain functions solely on glucose. Not on carbs, glucose, right? This is very distinct. This is very important that we have this terminology correct, okay? Usually the terminology doesn't matter, but in this situation, it does matter, right? So let's talk about the brain. Why does the brain need carbs or glucose specifically, right? Because every neuron, every nerve cell in your brain functions only on glucose. Okay. And your brain is firing at a trillion, just super light speed, right? It never stops functioning. Even when you're sleeping, it's not functioning. It doesn't stop functioning. Even when you're sleeping, your brain activates its own self-cleaning cleaning company. It's called the glymphatic system. So the glymphatic system have their street sweepers and come out and sweep your brain. But my point is, even during your sleep, your brain is still active, right? Literally, our brain never stops functioning, right? And so, because it's constantly running, it constantly needs energy. It needs more energy than any other organ in your body. And the only source of energy is glucose, okay? Now, when we talk about carbs, there's simple carbs and there's complex carbs. So here's a simple way of looking at what is carbohydrates, difference between simple and complex. Simple basically means it's a quick energy source. It's a quick boost of energy. Simple carbohydrates are broken down into glucose very quickly, and it's very quickly into the bloodstream, and it's shot right through to your brain. because your brain is the organ that consumes glucose the fastest compared to any other thing, right? Complex carbs are what are called time-released energy. So simple carbs are quick energy. Complex carbs are time-released energy. So they kind of drip energy to the rest of your body and also to your brain. You need both, right? You need both. So simple carbs are what we know of as honey. Honey is an example. Honey, maple syrup, right? Those are examples of simple carbs. What are examples of complex carbs? Whole wheat, brown rice, right? Brown rice, whole wheat. There's lots of, so-called new research that people are saying brown rice and wheat are terrible for you because of gluten. Well, I'm not talking about brown rice and wheat produced here in the US. Those typically are terrible for you because they're contaminated with pesticides, genetically modified, crossbred. The food source here in the US is not good for us. I'm talking about if you were to go to Italy, right? You get those wheat there, right? Those wheat are real wheat. They're not genetically modified. They're not man-made wheat, right? And so those are completely different. So that's what I'm talking about, but complex carbs, okay? Now, again, it's a reminder, all of the organs in your body needs glucose, but your brain needs it the most because it relies on it exclusively. It relies exclusively on a sugar. So glucose is a sugar. It's one type of sugar. So sugar encompasses many types of chemicals. Glucose, you probably heard of sucrose, fructose. See, that's why I was talking about those oses, right? Glucose, fructose, sucrose. These are all sugar. They're defined. Sugar is a category of all these oses. But your brain doesn't use all of these oses. It only uses glucose. So very important, okay? So I'm not telling you to go out and say, hey, if I want to get smarter, I want to have better memory, I'm just gonna go eat some chocolate cake or some ice cream. No, that's not what I'm saying. Those are not glucose, okay? And that's for another topic for another day, right? All right. So the brain, remember, this is like a refresher. The brain has something called the blood-brain barrier. It does not allow everything to go to the brain. What you put in your mouth does not all go to the brain. It has these gatekeepers specifically, because if you think about it, if your brain allowed everything and anything to go into the brain, we would all die tomorrow, right? Especially as foodies. I'm a foodie. I love eating, but sometimes when you go out to those food trucks or those food vendors, they're not clean. So they got some bacteria, some parasites in them, and so if our brain did not have a gatekeeper, all those bacteria and parasites would go to our brain and kill us, right? So thank God he created a blood-brain barrier for us to protect our brain, right? So when we eat foods, carbohydrates, whether it's simple or complex, our body breaks it down to glucose. That glucose, when it breaks it down to the small chemical of glucose, that glucose immediately, first thing that goes is to your brain, right? This is super important why you should not stay on a low-carb diet for a long time. So I know there's all these ketogenic carnivores, like low carbs, right? You need carbs. Your brain, the most important organ in your body needs carbs. I'm not saying don't do those diets. I'm saying don't stay on those diets for an extended amount of time. Don't stay on a low carb diet for an extended amount of time for more than 6 months, right? I would say it depends. If you have other ailments, other organ dysfunctions, maybe not even 3 months, that will start to affect your brain. Now, you may look good. I know those diets are for weight loss, right? People do those because they want to lose weight and they help. They lose weight quickly. But here's the thing about those diets. They look at one thing. The diet industry looks at, it's no different from Western medicine. So Western medicine, I love Western medicine. Don't get me wrong. I love Western medicine, but Western medicine, the weakness of Western medicine is it compartmentalizes the way it looks at the body. So you go to, for example, when you have a heart problem, you only go to the cardiologist, right? That person specializes in everything of the heart. But then if you have diabetes with that heart problem, then that cardiologist is going to say, oh, that's above my pay grade. That's not where I specialize in. I only specialize in this one little part called the heart. Everywhere else in the body, I don't know anything about that, right? And I'm not a specialist in it. So then you have to go to an endocrinologist if you have diabetes. But let's say you also break your leg. Now you got to go to an orthopedic surgeon, right? And so Western medicine is very compartmentalized. And a lot of times these physicians, they don't work together. They don't communicate. Now, let me ask you this. Does your heart communicate with the rest of your body? I'm talking about common sense. Let's just be real, right? If your heart dysfunctions, does it only affect your heart and your cardiovascular system? Is it compartmentalized where it doesn't affect any other parts of your body? Right? If you think about this common sense, every organ, if something happens, every organ in our body, even our finger, if our finger gets cut, doesn't that affect everything else in our body? Right? So that is compartmentalized or specialization. This is the downside of specialization. Specialization, I would like to say it's just more compartmentalized. We look at one organ or one system like by itself without even paying attention to how it affects all the other organs in our body, right? And so nutrition and diets are all the same, are very similar, not all the same. They're very similar. So when they look at carnivore diet, you look at the paleo diet, you look at Atkins diet, you look at keto diet, you're only looking at one thing, weight loss. Okay, great. You do the diet, you look great, but you just damage your brain cells. You damage your nerve cells. You starve your nerves. When you go into ketosis, that means you are not inputting you're not inputting carbohydrates. You're not getting the glucose your brain needs to function. So people on ketogenic diet, you may feel good initially, but eventually you start losing your brain, you start losing your memory, you start losing your cognitive skills. Yes, again, you look good, you may have the 6-pack, 8-pack, 12-pack, 10-pack, right? But at what expense? At the expense of your brain cells. Right? So you need to ask yourself, is looking good more important than your brain cells? Right? I'm not saying don't do the ketogenic diet. I'm saying do it for a short amount of time, but then you need to get back on some carbohydrates. Right? How much? We'll go into that in further podcasts, okay? But I just want to let you know, right? Your brain uses nothing but glucose, which you get from carbohydrates, which you get from eating. Our brain is fed by what we eat. This is why my dad told me, you are what you eat, right? People change it to you are what you absorb and blah, 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 right? But again, you slow down your brain function when you starve it of glucose. That's the important thing I want to tell you, right? So brain activity, cognitive performance, these are dependent upon carbohydrates. They're dependent upon glucose, okay? So now you may... Coming back to, I was talking about all the sugars, different types of sugars. There's glucose, fructose, sucrose. Fructose, we've heard of that. Or if you haven't heard of fructose, fructose is from fruits, right? Fructose is found from fruits, as well as honey. You also have lactose, found from milk and dairy. Now, all of these can be transformed into glucose, okay? And those are kind of the second sources. When your brain cannot find pure glucose, then it looks for fructose, lactose, sucrose. It looks at where it can convert those other types of sugar into glucose. But those other types of sugar, fructose, is not usable by the brain. This is the myths that the current health industry is saying that, oh, sugar is bad for you. No, sugar's not bad for you. Not all sugar is bad for you. The glucose sugar is great, is the only source for your brain. So now I'm not saying go eat some cakes, right? That's not what I'm saying, right? That is not what I'm saying. I am saying your brain needs glucose, and those other fructose, sucrose, lactose, they don't substitute for glucose, right? Now, your brain, okay, think about it. When you starve your brain of glucose, then your brain is going to send a message to the rest of your body saying, hey, I need more sugar. I am running low on fuel. I need more fuel, and that is sugar. And that sends the message that makes us want to be hungry. That's why we're starving. That those of y'all who have a sweet tooth, the reason why you have sweet tooth is because you're eating the wrong type of carbohydrates. You're eating sucrose. You're eating the cakes, the dairy. You're eating the ice cream. You're eating, the chocolate chip cookies. You're eating those candy canes. Like, it's Christmas, it's November, I'm doing this it's December, I'm doing this podcast, and it's Christmas next week, right? In a couple of days. You are eating those wrong things. Those are not what your brain wants. However, when your brain sends out the bat signal and says, hey, I need more fuel, we cannot determine, okay, I just need to eat glucose. We just grab whatever in front of us, and we just start eating tons of sugar, the wrong type of sugar, okay? So when you eat sugar, your brain, says, hey, I need this amount of sugar. When your brain gets enough sugar, it will stop. It will close the gates. So let me go back. When your brain is trying to function, you're trying to think, you're trying to prepare for an exam, you're trying to memorize a speech, you're trying to prepare for a presentation, your brain is working super hard, and your brain is studying. Maybe you're a physician, you need to save, you're a surgeon, you need to save people, you need your brain working. Well, your brain's gonna open the gate of sugar. It's gonna first send the signal down to the rest of your body, say, hey, I need more sugar, I need more fuel. It's gonna open the gates to allow that glucose to come in to your brain. Now, when your brain gets enough of the glucose, then it's going to say, this is the beauty of our brain. It will say, I'm done. Okay, I'm done. That's all I need. I only need 10 sugar, that's it. Okay, I'm done. Then it will automatically close the gates, right? But here's the problem. When it closes the gates, we don't initially get that signal from the rest of our body. So we keep on stuffing ourselves with chocolate chip cookies, right? So now think about it. The brain got enough sugar, so it closed the gates. So no more sugar is going to the brain. So where is the rest of that glucose going? Now it's going into your fat cells, right? Now some of it, the liver is going to take it and convert it into stored glucose, which is called glycogen. But it can only store so much. And if you overwhelm your liver of turning that excess sugar into stored glycogen, stored sugar, that's when you start developing what many of you probably have heard of this. It's called fatty liver. Fatty liver is because you're eating the wrong type of sugar in excess quantities. And even if you eat too much sugar, even if you eat a lot of glucose, right? Remember, your brain, when your brain says, I had enough, it closes the door, and that excess sugar, some of it gets turned into glycogen, stored in your liver as glycogen. But if you keep on eating sugar and glucose, it becomes a fatty liver. And then after that, it starts going into your fat cells. And your fat cells start to expand. That's why you get fat. That's why, from those of y'all who have been on a keto diet or a low-carb diet, you lose weight, but then once you go back to eating, what happens? What happens when you go back? Let's say you go on the keto diet and you lost 50 pounds in 1 month, which is highly unhealthy. But let's just say you did that. And then after you're done, you're like, man, I reached my bikini body weight. I got the 6-pack, 8-pack. I'm ready to go to the beach. And then you start eating, right? This is what happens majority of the time. You balloon up. All of that keto diet went away, right? Because you starved your brain of sugar. Your brain goes crazy, man. I need more sugar, right? So I'm not going to go into the weight loss part, because I need to finish up the part about the topic of today, brain power of carbs. But I just want to give you some idea, giving you the information and how it applies to your life. Okay. Now, the brain does store some glycogen in the brain, but the brain doesn't, because the brain uses up the glucose so fast, it burns through it very quickly. And it stores a little of glycogen in your brain, right? But not a lot. But it uses that up too. If you go on a low carb diet, it uses that up very quickly. So the main barrier, I would say, check and balance system is the gates, the blood-brain barrier. When it has enough, it closes the gate. When it needs more, it opens a gate. This is very super sensitive, right, in the brain. So let's say that your brain runs too low. Like you are on that low carb diet, you are on the keto diet, you are starving your brain of glucose, okay, for 3 months. Your brain has a plan B, and this is why the keto diet works, right? Your brain has a plan B. Plan A is give me all the glucose you have. I'm gonna get all the glucose from the body, and when you starve it, you go on a keto diet and you do no more carbs, you starve your brain of glucose, it goes to plan B. Plan B is this. It tells your liver to start burning fat. That's where it creates a molecule called ketone body. This is why the ketogenic diet works, right? The ketone bodies become backup energy source for the brain. That's what, when people who are 100% like, oh, you got to do the keto diet, this is what they're going to tell you. They're going to tell you, hey, when you starve your body of carbs, then your brain will tell your body to break down the fat into ketone bodies. And your brain will start using ketone bodies as energy source, which is true. All of what they told you is true. What they didn't tell you is this is plan B for the body. Ketone body is not a great source of energy for the brain. The brain prefers the best source, I would say the cleanest source of fuel for the brain is glucose. Secondary, I kind of call it like the watered down energy source is ketone bodies. So let me give you an example. Let's say you go to the gas, you drive your car, you pump gas, and most of it is gasoline, like 10% is ethanol, right? And that's what your car works best on. 90%, let's say 90% gasoline. But what if you went to the pump and they watered it down? What if only 50% was gasoline, 50% was other stuff, water, alcohol, whatever, all the other stuff, right? Only 50% was true gasoline. Would your car run just as good as before? So scenario one, let me repeat that. Scenario one is you take your car, you pump gas, 90% gasoline. That's what you've been doing. That's what we all do right now. And your car runs super good. That's the best it runs. But then you go to the gas station, they ran out of gas, so they watered it down, and now you only have 50% gasoline. Do you think your car will run just as good as this? Get my point? That's gasoline at 90% is glucose. Watered down glucose or energy source is ketone bodies, right? So now you're feeding your brain a lower quality source of energy. Do you think that helps your brain function better or worse? That's what I'm saying. Ketogenic diet works great for weight loss, but it's damaging your brain at the same time because it's giving that watered down energy source. Okay. So that is the reason why, like I said, you don't want to stay on the ketogenic diet for too long. It can definitely help you lose weight, or a low carb diet. You don't want to be on a low carb diet for too long because it can help you lose weight, but it's also helping you losing your brain. Now, if you have a family history of Alzheimer's, I would not do that for an extended amount of time, okay? Now, again, I'm not talking about eating cakes, donuts. That's not what I'm talking about when I say eat sugar, right? I'm talking about getting glucose, right, through complex carbs. And I'll give you a hint. What are the best complex carbs? Vegetables. Vegetable is a sugar. What? Yes, vegetable is a sugar, right? But we'll get to that later on, right? So the ketogenic diet, again, This is the exception. When the body breaks down fat to make ketone bodies for energy source, that is the exception. That is not the rule. The rule is the body's going to find every other way it can to get sugar, glucose. When I say sugar, I'm talking about glucose, right? So more importantly, the brain cannot run solely on ketones. Just like the car, when you're at 50% gasoline and other 50% of alcohol or water, that's damaging your engine. It's damaging your engine, right? It's damaging your engine, but you're still able to run it. That is what ketone bodies does to your brain, right? So your body, if you're on a ketogenic diet or low carb diet, your brain still needs to at least to have 30% of its energy from glucose. So when you even take away all the glucose, no carbs, like, you just eat steaks, you just eat animal protein, right? Then you're killing your brain. So here's another fact. Your brain is so vulnerable to sugar deficiencies that any interruption of the glucose supply causes a near immediate failure of brain function. I'm getting this from neuroscientists. Okay, this is not my personal belief, right? This is from one of the Alzheimer's prevention clinic in New York. And so when your brain is deficient of glucose, it causes an immediate failure of brain function. So yes, you are damaging your brain when you do low carb, no carb diet. And I'm talking about, let me clarify that. I'm not talking about simple carbs. I'm talking about complex carbs. When I say no carb or low carb, I'm talking about diets that remove complex carbs, right? Simple carbs, they remove simple carbs, but they also remove complex carbs. No carb diet, right? And this is why when people have you ever noticed that, hey, for those of you who don't believe this, when you are on a low, your blood sugar is low, every one of us has been through a situation where our blood sugar is low. When our blood sugar was low, how did you feel? You feel tired, you feel weak, right? How did your brain feel? Were you clear? Was your brain clear? Were you calm? Were you relaxed, or were you irritated? Or were you miserable? Were you like, oh wow, I think I'm going to pass out? That feeling of pass out it's a physical thing. Because if you starve your brain too long of glucose, you go into severe hypoglycemia, you are at risk of losing consciousness. That's why people who, my wife, when we were moving in the summer, she didn't eat her meal. We were moving stuff, packages onto a truck, and she didn't eat. And then it was also hot. So she was severely dehydrated, but she's also hypoglycemic, and she almost passed out. That is the reason, right? So point of this podcast is to let you know, you can do, if you choose to do those low carbs, no carb diets, just be careful. Don't listen to people that say you don't need complex carbs. You need complex carbs. Your brain only functions on glucose. Ketone bodies is a poor source of energy. It's a backup energy for your brain, but your brain cannot survive on it for too long. The brain cells start to dysfunction when you do not give it glucose. And that's the whole point of this podcast, right? So thank you, Vina, Marissa, for I find sugar triggers hunger. Marissa, you're absolutely right. Sugar can trigger hunger. It depends on what type of sugar. Remember, sugar, there's glucose, fructose, sucrose, lactose. Those are all sugar, right? It depends on what type of sugar you're eating, right? Yet am up for suggestions for healthy sweeteners. I have a weight issue, so sugar doesn't work for me. Yeah, for now, monk fruit's kind of the golden child right now. Just make sure it's an organic monk fruit. Honey is good, right? But it's just a small amounts of honey, right? Yes, it is sugar, but it's more glucose sugar, right? And so stay away from I would say synthetic simple carbs. So man-made sugar. I know it's already Christmas coming, candy canes, cupcakes, whatever, pies, all of these are terrible for you. They do nothing, very little for your brain, okay? Very little for your brain. So those of y'all, thank you for staying and not dropping off. I'm about to give you some statistics for those of y'all, those that dropped off are gonna miss this. So here's a cool statistic. Our brain needs 62 grams of glucose every day. 62 grams of glucose. How do I get that? 3 tablespoons of raw honey will give you the 62 grams of glucose you need in one day. 3 tablespoons of raw honey will give you all the glucose you need in one day. Here's the problem. We tend to go for the chocolate chip cookies. You would need to eat 16 pounds of chocolate chip cookies to get 62 grams of glucose. Let me repeat that. You only need 3 tablespoons of raw honey every day. And that's all the glucose your brain needs. 3 tablespoons. But in order to get, that will give you 62 grams of glucose. But 62 grams of glucose, you would need to eat 16 pounds of chocolate chip. The wrong type of glucose. So again, when you don't eat the right type of glucose, you need almost, I don't know if that's 10, 20, 100 times more sugar, right? That is a myth. And that's what we're gonna talk about next week. Thank you, everybody. Merry Christmas. Thank you. Happy holidays. And for tuning in, we're gonna dive deeper into sugar and what types of sugar, complex carbs, what to eat, what are the best sources. So stay tuned next week, same time, same channel, Sundays, 8:30 a.m. Central Standard Time, and we will continue this conversation.
This episode is sponsored by Achieve Integrative Health, the #1 acupuncture clinic in the US. We're grateful for their support in helping us bring you the Restorative Longevity Podcast.